3, 4 people.
Maybe they're caller, or no, they're probably, the caller 3 and 4 are probably the redundant people for the people calling in. Maybe give it till 2:05.
Nicole, thank you for putting your phone number in. Appreciate that.
Looks like Nicole might be offline. I wonder if she's having some Wi-Fi hiccups.
I was, and I'm back in, and now I see myself listed twice.
Oh, I see you as off.
Yeah, I was like, oh, I myself am having technical difficulties.
That's not allowed, dude.
I know.
You're supposed to be the person to the rescue.
Yeah, right. Well, it's 4 minutes after 2. I know we've got a lot to do. What do you think? Shall we go ahead and get started?
Sure. I see 6 of the
Sandra,
advisory
okay
committee members.
Sure, Patsy, you go.
Okey-doke. All right, well, we'll get started now, and we can always go back over things a little bit if we need to. So good afternoon, everyone. This is Patsy Tennyson, and I know that you all got slides for the meeting, but you also got some other documents, including teleconference instructions. I'm going to review those quickly in just a little while, but first, just so you know, my colleague Emily Michelson is our meeting organizer. So she's the one who got the meeting started, and we'll end the meeting, and she can mute and unmute people as well. And Nicole Paletto is available by phone to assist anybody with troubleshooting technical issues. And Nicole has put her information in the chat box. We'll get her phone number in the chat box. We'll get to that in just a minute. The only people on the AC that I have not seen are Mark, Ricky, Trish, and David. If any of you are actually on the line, on the phone, can you tell me now?
I'm here. This is Trish.
Oh, hi,
Trish. I'm here.
Okay, so Mark, Ricky, or David?
Ricky's here.
Okay, Ricky, thank you.
And
right.
Did you hear Trish is here?
I hear Trish and Ricky both checked in.
Yes.
Okay. All right, I want to go ahead. John, I believe you're controlling the slides. If you could go to slide 2, that would be great.
Can we, can I do roll call on everyone else so I can record in the notes who's here?
Thank you.
So from the city of San Diego,
right.
I have Sandra Carlson, Nikki McGinnis, Mike Bolari, and I just saw Sarah Brower. From the county of San Diego, Leanne Crow and Jim Bennett. From the consultant team, John Ayers, myself, Rosalind Prickett, Nicole Paletto, Micah Eggleton, Patsy Tennyson, Emily Michelson, Nate Brown, and I Actually, I don't think Nate logged on to this call, did he?
I haven't seen his name,
Okay,
but that
good.
doesn't mean anything.
Okay. And then from members of the public, I see an Anita Rejmi from DWR, a Pat McTeague. Can you identify yourself and your organization?
Yeah, hi, it's Pat McTagg. I'm the Deputy Director of the San Diego Zoo Safari Park.
Gotcha, thank you. And then I see a Raj Brown. Can you identify your
Raj
organization?
Brown. I'm with San Diego Zoo Safari Park.
Got it, thank you. And I also see an Ali Barrenter.
Hi, yes, Ali Barrenter with the City of San Diego in the Mayor's office.
Okay. And then a Chris Brzezicki.
Yeah, I'm with the San Diego Zoo Safari Park as well.
Got it. Alicia Appel, City of Escondido, Brad Blaze, The Pinery, and Hank Rupp with Rancho Guajito. Those were all the folks that
Yes.
I caught as I was monitoring the chat. Is there anyone else on this call that I have not named?
Eric Larson with the Farm Bureau.
Oh yes, I got you. I have Carol, Eric, Frank, Lisa, Matt, Ricky, and Trish for the AC. Anyone else participating that hasn't been named? Okay, thanks.
Here we go. Slide number 2. You'll see 2 icons at the bottom of this slide that are circled in red, and those are for the microphone and the camera. To turn either one of those off, use the controls on the bottom of the screen. And if you are having trouble seeing them, wiggle your mouse while it's on the screen, and that should make them appear. Again, if you do have any kind of technical issues, Nicole's number is 858-875-7405. Unless you're asking a question, though, if you could please turn your microphone off, the microphone on your phone if you're calling in, or on your computer if you're going to use that microphone. We're just trying to avoid background noise as much as possible. And also, all you need is one of those microphones. So if you're using your microphone on your phone, as I am, then turn off the microphone on your computer. Otherwise, we get bad feedback. Vice versa, if you want to use the microphone on the computer, turn off your microphone on your phone, if you would, please. That would be a big help. Go over to the next slide, John. There we go. This is how to ask a question. If you look up at the right-hand, the top right-hand corner on your screen, it's circled in red here. It looks like a thought bubble in a cartoon. That is the chat box. That's what we're going to use to identify questions or comments throughout the meeting. So as John is making his presentation, for example, if you think of a question that you want to ask, you can either type the whole question in the chat box, or you can just type the word question or comment. And I'm going to be monitoring that chat box. And at the end of the presentation, we'll pause and take all of those questions or comments that appear in the chat box. If you are calling in on a telephone only and not using the computer, you won't see this chat box, obviously, but we will also ask for people on the telephone if they have questions or comments. So you will be able to ask your questions. Don't worry about that. There's a couple ways to do that. Next slide, please. Okay, again, look at the top of the screen where it says View Everyone. This is a way you can see either initials, or you can see faces or names of people who are on the line. you can, if you click on that box that says, or that icon that says view everyone, there's a couple of ways you can use that. A lot of times I want to see the slide as large as I can see it, and so I click the hide everyone choice, and that way it makes the slide go to full screen. There's also a gray horizontal bar between those pictures and the slide that I'm looking at right now anyway. You can move that gray horizontal bar up and down, and that will also allow you to change the view that you're looking at. So before we go any further on the slides, are there any questions? Does anybody have any questions about the instructions? If you click on that chat box, by the way, the very second thing there is Nicole's phone number. So if you're having technical difficulties and you can actually get to the chat box, her phone number's there. Once again, it's 858-875-7405. I am not seeing any questions, but before we go to the next slide, I want to just let you know that just as we would if we were in the Farm Bureau boardroom, John Ayers will be presenting and Rosalind Prickett is taking notes. Now we're going to go to slide 5, and Sandra has some important introductions for the rest of the team.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I see nodding heads. Great. So welcome to our GSP Go-To meeting. Thank you for being flexible during these challenging coronavirus times. As you can see in the picture, my supervisor, Karina Danek, had her baby, a baby boy named Raphael, on April 27th. And she's on maternity leave now. I'm hearing some background noise. So she's coming back in August. She's home sleeping, I think, today. And so in the meantime, we have Nikki McGinnis, who has a lot of experience. Wait, let me back up. So my name is Sandra Carlson. I'm the project engineer for the GSP. So Karina had been in charge of the GSP. She was on maternity leave. So Nikki, who is a principal water resources specialist, is now, she took over Karina's place for the next few months. And then as a reminder, I'm sure you all remember, the city formed a groundwater sustainability agency with the county for the San Pasqual Valley groundwater basin. So we're working in collaboration with the county. And our team members for the county, they're on the line today, are Jim Bennett and Leanne Crow, who are both part of the core team for the GSA. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. Also, Rosalind, before we go on, did you get Sarah? I didn't get Sarah's last name, and also Mark Stadler, both signed in. You got their names?
I did. I got Sarah and Mark.
Okay, and I see maybe a new caller. Did somebody just join? And if so, can you tell us your name?
This is Robin Badger.
Hey, Robin.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, thank you. And thanks for the update on the staffing, Sandra. Let's go to the next slide, John, meeting agenda. Okay, here you see the meeting agenda. In just a minute, I'm going to go over the meeting objectives. But today we're going to be talking about the SGMA terminology and GSP development process and schedule. And then we're going to be talking about the basin prioritization, basin definition, and then a review of the undesirable results, that matrix that we all worked on at the last meeting where we were together. And then we will talk about, then we will have public comment. And just a note, there's no public comment until the very end of the meeting, but we will be able to have that time. And so be sure to hold on to your comments or questions if you have them. The meeting objectives for today are to provide GSP development update, explain SGMA terms and sustainable management criteria, discuss the San Pasqual Valley groundwater basin boundaries, review that undesirable results statement, and provide a field program update. You should have all received the meeting summary as handout number 1. And you'll be able to provide written comments to us by, I always forget the date, but it's 2 weeks from now, right? Is that correct, John? Or
Correct.
Somebody?
Thursday, May 28th.
I'm just curious about, I'm sorry?
Thursday, May 28th.
Thursday, May 28th. So if you have corrections or suggestions on the meeting summary, please send us those in writing. And now let's go to the next slide. And just to do a brief recap of the November 7th, it's hard to remember back to November, but November 7th, technical peer review. The technical peer review group received technical input about the undesirable results approach, about water quality and SGMA, groundwater levels, numerical model approach, land subsidence, and bottom of basin. So some of that material and information will be part of what John is reporting on today as he does his presentation. Are there any questions at this point before we go to John? Okay, everybody remember to use that chat box in the upper right corner. And John, go ahead and take it away.
Oh, and I'm unmuted. All right. So we just covered questions. So one of the things I want to do at every advisory committee meeting is go over some SGMA terminology, our overall process, and our schedule, just so we can kind of highlight where we are in the process. There's a lot of moving pieces in a GSP, and it's important to kind of know where you are in the process. And even though our project team lives in this stuff every day, no, you guys don't. It's not your job to memorize all these terms. So we spent a little time reviewing them each meeting. So we're going to go over those 3 things. I have this weird habit of talking ahead of my slides. I just did it there. So here's our terminology. We've got the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, SGMA, commonly referred to as SGMA, a groundwater sustainability agency here in San Pasqual. The city and the county have worked together to form the GSA here. Groundwater Sustainability Plan, or GSP, that's what we are writing. The hydrogeologic conceptual model is a section of the GSP or HCM where we talk about the geology and the grains in the soil and where they are and how many they are and that sort of thing. Sustainable management criteria, there's something that's coming up soon, but we haven't talked about that yet in detail. It includes things like the minimum threshold and the measurable objective. Projects and management actions, or PMAs, those are what projects would get built or what actions would be undertaken by the GSA as a result of the development of the GSP. State Water Resources Control Board, SWRCB, and DWR, the Department of Water Resources. So this is an overview of our work plan. And as you remember from last time, we started over here at the physical conditions, which includes the hydrogeologic conceptual model. And now we're moving into the undesirable results narratives and beginning the groundwater modeling. This is the schedule from the work plan we handed out last time. We're here in Q2, we've got undesirable results, groundwater model, start thinking about sustainable management criteria, field program updates, those sorts of things. And all these things are happening here. We won't have started projects and management actions still for another quarter or 2, but we're getting moving on the other things. We wanted to spend a minute to talk about why the San Pasqual Valley is medium priority. Just kind of put this subject to rest, as it were. So the Department of Water Resources prioritized groundwater basins back in 2014, and you can see it on here. It's CASGEM 24. This is the first time they did it. They came up with a combined score of 19. And DWR stated that their goal in that prioritization was to have 95% of groundwater production occurring in medium or higher priority basins, medium or high. And so that what that means is there's 400 and something groundwater basins in the state, a whole bunch of little ones off in the Mojave Desert area, a whole bunch of little ones on the other side of the Sierras uphill, and various small mountain ones. Those ones don't need to be managed at all because there's no overlying use. In fact, people don't live over most of those. And so they selected 130, 120 to be medium or high priority. And I want to spend a moment to go through the points rankings and how they got there. So they looked at population, and more population equals more points. San Pasqual actually has not a large population living in it, so it only got 1 point there. Population growth, we don't have any population growth forecasted or a very, very small amount, so that got a 0. The number of supply wells, we got 2 points in 2014 and 2 more for 4 in 2019. And just to be clear, public supply wells, as reviewed at the state nomenclature, doesn't necessarily mean a giant municipal well feeding a subdivision. It goes from the Department of Drinking Water or the Department of Public Health's listing of well categorizations. So in this case, wells like the one that supplies the academy or the one that provides water to the Heritage Center, where we've held some of our GSA formation meetings, those count as public supply wells because those are public spaces, according to the state. So where they found 2 points worth in 2014 and 4 in 2019. And then the next category is the number of wells drawing water. That's an inventory of however many wells are here. That was 3 points, 2014, 4, 2019. Irrigation acreage got a full 5 out of 5 points because San Pasqual Valley is almost entirely irrigated agriculture, except for where the streams and rivers are, with a few exceptions. And the groundwater reliance score is also very high because nearly all of that irrigation is irrigated with groundwater. The next category is impacts, which is where the department went to look for things that they found troublesome, like continually lowering groundwater levels or water quality concerns. And so they gave the basin more points in 2014 and only 1 in 2019. And then an other is like catch-all grouping, where they'll put other things that stand out and give them points. It's worth pointing out that medium priority starts at 14 points and San Pasqual has 19. So in order for this basin to have scored non-medium or low, it would have to have 6 points of error. And that's just not likely to happen. And that is why we are medium priority. So questions on the terminology overview and the schedule and the prioritization?
Frank, did you have something?
Yeah, I did. So it is safe to say that water quality was not the most contributing factor to us becoming a medium groundwater basin, but rather the factors of we're almost entirely dependent upon groundwater, and there is a large amount of irrigated land in the groundwater basin.
Right. You have enough points to push it into medium priority just in the number of wells, the dependence on groundwater, and the amount of irrigation.
Thank you.
Well, this is a good
Anyone
point.
else on the EAC? Any other advisory committee members who have a question? Okay, is there anybody on the telephone who has a question at this point? Okay, John, I don't hear anybody, so
Great.
let's move to the next slide.
So I wanted to follow up on Frank's comment here about the water quality. One of the things that that lower score in the latest evaluation does for us is it says fairly clearly that DWR isn't terribly concerned about groundwater quality here. Whereas if they had given us 5 points there, we'd have to do something significant about it. Instead, we get to consider what our surface water quality is, what our groundwater quality is, what our uses are, and work on setting thresholds that work for our basin rather than what we think the state wants. And that's something we'll get into in detail when we get to that part of the plan development. We'll start talking about that next meeting in July, actually. Basin definition. So groundwater basins are defined by boundaries to help establish where the basin ends. So that's typically along the edges on the outside, like bathtub ring, and then how deep, what is the bottom of that bathtub? Bathtub's not exactly the best euphemism because the bottom isn't like a bathtub. The bottom is not exactly impermeable to water. So the boundaries of the San Pasqual Basin are defined as the contact between alluvium and residuum with granitic rock, which for the spatial extent, the outer ring, was picked by DWR from a geologic map, plus a little extra study when they corrected it. And what we see, and so what that is that's this area along here, the edge of the valley along the mountain front. And that's easy to pick off a geologic map or see in person. It's much harder to identify what's going on down here. Some of the wells don't even reach the bottom. And so we have to infer or make estimates about where the bottom of the basin is. We have a general idea, but it's never 100% perfect or accurate because we didn't basically trench the entire thing or dig up the entire basin and see where it was. So we've come up, the core team and the consulting team have come up with this definition of the basin statement. The San Pasqual Valley Basin is defined by Bulletin 118 and includes the alluvium and residuum. The interaction of groundwater between fractured bedrock beneath the alluvium or residuum is not well understood and represents a potential data gap in the understanding of the San Pasqual Valley Basin interaction. Just to back up a second, I'm using the word residuum and I haven't explained what it is, or alluvium for that matter. Alluvium is the sand, gravel, silt, and clay that is deposited by a moving water body like a river or creek. And so, you go out to a creek and you dig around in the bottom of it and you get some sand, you get some cobbles, whatever. That is alluvium. Most of the basin was deposited as alluvium. So the streams brought stuff out of the mountains, deposited that material down on the ground, and in this basin, it slowly filled up with material over millions of years. What residuum is residuum is between the alluvium, which we just talked about, and bedrock, which is at the bottom. And what residuum is it's weathered bedrock. So prior to it getting buried, or partially after it was buried, the granitic rock weathered. And that means it chemically weathered. The chemicals in water, it broke down some of the minerals like feldspars or orthoclase feldspars, biotites, micas, those sorts of things break down easy. Quartz does not break down, that becomes sand. And then a lot of the time that stuff turns into clay. So when you drill into the ground, you go through the alluvium and then you hit what looks like bedrock, but is soft and smushy. And you drill through enough of that, then you hit the bedrock. So it goes alluvium, residuum, bedrock. The amount of residuum changes from place to place depending on how it was weathered. And so oftentimes we have to estimate where that was. If groundwater conditions require the implementation of management actions, something we haven't talked about to set up yet, additional data collection, studies, aquifer testing, and/or surveying may be recommended to improve the understanding of this basin. So if we have management conditions where we need to manage the amount of water being pumped, and there's some extra work involved in doing that. We don't know that's the case yet. It may not be. Then we need to understand the interaction of water between the alluvium, the residuum, and the bedrock better, so we can understand what wells are affecting conditions inside the basin. And that would be something that gets addressed during implementation after the plan is written. We're not going to inventory everybody's wells today or tomorrow or while we're writing the plan. If that's something that becomes necessary, if we decide it's necessary as an advisory committee, as the core team, then we'll recommend a process to do that after the plan is finished. We have so much work to do to get the plan completed that even if we knew we needed that to do implementation, we still wouldn't do it now because we don't have time. We've got other things we've got to focus on. So, questions?
There's nothing in the chat box. I don't know whether anybody has a question at this point. Any AC member?
I have a
question. This is Frank Cohen.
Please.
It seems to me that there's kind of a paradox in this knowledge of data gaps and the inaction to even prioritize getting information to fill that gap within this plan. I mean, can you talk about that a little bit?
So,
who just asked that question?
Matt Whitman.
Thanks, Matt.
Can you rephrase that for me, Matt? I'm not sure I follow.
I'm a little confused because the this is called a groundwater management plan. We're recognizing that data gaps exist, yet it doesn't sound like with the plan any action is going to be undertaken to fill those data gaps.
So, because SGMA's coming at us fast, the whole plan has to be wrapped up and submitted to the state at the beginning of 2022, a year and a half away. There are just some things we don't have time to do. And also there's a cost component associated with that, but it's really about time. We are going to address data gaps by identifying where they exist. Like if we don't have monitoring in the central part of the basin, for instance, we would recommend adding monitoring there. But we're not going to add that monitoring right now. We're going to recommend it. Say, hey, we would like to have this monitored. This interaction between alluvium, residuum, and bedrock is in the same boat. We recognize it's a data gap, and it's a challenging one to fill and generate comprehensive understanding on. So what we're going to do is identify it as a data gap, and depending on how important it is later in the process, as we get into the water budget, if our water budget says, hey, we're using however much water it comes in, we're fine, but we don't need strict management actions, and we're not going to need to worry about that interaction at the bottom. But if the water budget comes in and, oh, we're using twice as much water that comes in, which isn't what I think is going on, just as an example, then we do have to understand where everybody's wells are, where they're pumping from, what the effects are. If they're pumping from only bedrock, does that affect conditions in the basin? We're going to want to know that at that point. We can't go out and make that decision now because A, we don't have all that information. The GSA doesn't technically have the authority yet until the plan is written to force people to give them that information. Right now, it's all by permission. And so while we're in this state, we can't get at that, and nor should we, because we don't know that we're going to use it, and that could be a giant waste of expense and time. And so we're going to identify this as a data gap, and we're going to have a plan to fill it. And when that plan gets done or how much of it gets done depends on how important it is once the plan's written.
Will there be any recommendations or anything, way down the road, obviously, with the finalized plan of prioritizing certain data gaps that exist?
Absolutely. One of the things we have to do is compile all our recommendations, like, you know, that monitoring spot or this issue, and say, hey, here's this thing, here's what we're going to do about it, and here's when we're going to do it. We have to put that into the plan, the implementation schedule. You do that near the end. And so there will be essentially a table of the different actions that GSA is going to move towards doing and when they hope to do it. And I use the word hope because it's been my experience that if we try and set really hard timelines, right now they just aren't real, and we find out that things move. So we'll provide a range for some of those. Some things that are really pressing will make very short term, things that are less pressing, longer term. And those will match out as we go. And we will talk about that process as part of projects and management actions at a later meeting.
All right, thank you, John.
Sure.
Any other advisory committee members?
This is Frank Conine. I have a couple questions. The new monitoring wells that were installed on Matt Whitman's or West Coast Turf's facility and my facility, will those monitoring wells provide a better understanding of the relationship between the alluvium, the residuum, and the granite or bedrock zones? So
they will help improve our understanding. That's the type of thing we need to have a better understanding. This little off track for this presentation, but we'll be looking at vertical gradients and other aquifer properties associated with the multiple completion wells like those two, and the ones that the three that are already in place as we develop the plan. It's still spatially complex. Alluvium and residuum and bedrock is different in different parts of the basin. And so in order to come up with something more comprehensive, we're going to need more study to get that sorted out. And we'll probably have to take that on as a case-by-case basis moving forward.
But you were mentioning that the main reason for not including or using the not including the bedrock in the groundwater basin was because of the large data gap and the time and consumption of resources to fill that data gap. Now that you've already spent the hundreds of thousands of dollars, or the city has spent the hundreds of thousands of dollars to put in those two monitoring wells, shouldn't it seems like we're over the hump, and that data gap should be able to have some understanding rather quickly.
But we only would have that in a few locations, and that's where it gets challenging. It's not like a layer cake where we go certain part down and you get lemon cream everywhere. It's more like a beach where the sand's all mixed together, and sometimes you get that black sand and it comes in a stripe. And if you dig through that, you get back to regular sand, and it's all these different little layers all stacked up on top of one another. And those change from place to place. So we don't know exactly what's at depth for other portions of the basin, even if we do at those two spots, and we also do for the other triple completions that were logged by geologists. That all helps. It's just something that takes a significant amount of time. And so that's why we're kind of punting on that. Hold off, get it in detail if it's needed after the fact, which would entail another set of public meetings and discussions and study as needed to get that sorted out.
You used a bathtub analogy to the basin, and then you decided to say that the bathtub analogy was not the best analogy because some water would still be lost out of the bottom. How will the models take into account that water that's being left or lost out of the bottom of your bathtub without utilizing the data that should be quickly obtainable from the two monitoring wells and the three USGS wells that are already here in the valley?
So I'm not a modeler, and I'm always a little hesitant to speak for our modeler who's not on this call, but when you develop a numerical model, you tend to make it larger than the thing you're studying so that you can estimate conditions outside of the area you're studying. The spatial extent is larger to capture some watersheds, and the depth goes further than the area you're defining, ideally towards tight bedrock where there's no water movement. And when we know where that is, we're going to use that information. And when we don't know where that is or what that is, we're going to estimate.
Thank you.
Anybody else? What about someone, anybody on the phone, not on your computer, that wants to ask a question at this point? Any other advisory committee member who has a question? Okay, I don't see anybody, John, so let's move on.
Undesirable results. So undesirable result is used two ways in Sigma. One is statements that describe what happens if conditions are bad for local users, i.e. what happens if there is quote unquote an undesirable result. It's the thing we do not want to have happen. So last meeting we did that workshop and we talked about what we wanted and what we didn't want. And we use that information to help flesh this approach out for what those statements are. The second use, which we're not going to spend any time on today, but I just want to throw it out there because we're going to come back to it, is that you use sustainable management criteria, i.e. those thresholds I briefly mentioned on monitoring sites up and down. And if a certain amount of measurements go below those thresholds, by definition, the basis reaches an undesirable result and faces the scorn of regulators. And so we'll spend a lot of time later in the program addressing the second bullet, but today we're going to focus on the first one, which is describing what wrong looks like. And so these statements and how they're detected are a very important part of the plan, and they require careful wording, and they need to reflect local concerns and be written in such a way so that they both are broad to meet regulations and flexible enough that we can make them match what we think is important here in the basin. And that the statement drives the monitoring networks, which have to be able to detect the undesirable result, the thresholds, which you set above where the undesirable result condition is, projects and management actions to avoid it, that sort of thing. Here we have the matrix. We compiled this matrix with information from the workshop. We took those notes we wrote down on the big white pages, and then we categorized them. Some of the comments were about groundwater levels, and some were about quality, and some were about surface water connectivity, and some things were really about what is bad, and some were things people wanted to be worried about related to what's bad. And so we grouped them based on where they might fit in with Sigma components, like work with Regional Water Quality Control Board on runoff is potentially a management action, not an undesirable result. So that's sorted down here. And we have a catch-all down here for planning principles. So if you commented, it should be on here in some form. The wording won't exactly match. We use some formal terminology like adverse impacts to the viability of agriculture and the agricultural economy. The comment wasn't specifically adverse impacts, but it was, we want to make sure that agriculture is viable in this basin during implementation. So that's there, and that's in your handout. Look at that, handout number 2. And we have the undesirable result statement for each of the 6 sustainability indicators except seawater intrusion, where we have a statement stating that the basin is not near bays, inlets, or seas, and thus exempt. And so I'm going to read this and then sort of break it down. So the undesirable result for the chronic lowering of groundwater levels is a result that causes significant and unreasonable reduction in the long-term viability of domestic, agricultural, municipal, or environmental uses over the planning and implementation horizon of this GSP. So we used a lot of funny words in there. I'm just going to start with the first part here. And so the official definition of sigma related to the lowering groundwater levels, it uses the word chronic. And why do we keep this in here? Well, if levels go down one year and then come back up the next, that's not really a problem, is it? If they go down and stay down, or go down a little every year for a long time, that's potentially a problem. And that's chronic. So by using the word chronic, we limit what is the undesirable result to things that are actually a problem. And then we use the word significant and unreasonable. The law and the regulations use these words all over the place, yet they are never formally defined. And that was done on purpose. The reason they weren't defined is because we are supposed to define that. What's significant and unreasonable here? And we're going to be looking at the different components of this, like is say it's domestic wells. And we say, okay, 0 domestic wells going dry is okay, but 1 going dry is an undesirable result. Is 1 going dry significant and unreasonable? Well, we have to make that decision. So we'll be taking that into consideration while we work on those things and bringing ideas back to you. We might say, well, here's where 5% of wells go dry looks like, and here's where 20%. And it's kind of bad optics to say, well, we're making a plan that allows, quote unquote, 20% of the wells to go dry, but maybe that's only 3 wells. Is that significant and unreasonable? We need your input to make sure that we capture that properly. And then we have the long-term viability of domestic, agricultural, municipal, and environmental. Those are the 4 catch-all terms for water use, basically personal houses, irrigation, cities, towns, environmental centers, academies, and the environment like groundwater-dependent ecosystems or fish and rivers, etc. And the last sentence is over the planning and implementation horizon of this GSP, which means if something might happen 100 years from now, we're not addressing that now because our planning and implementation horizon is 20 years. So we have a lot of wiggle words in here that give us the ability to manage moving forward with the right details, the details that the folks here in the base and you care about, and not with the details that you don't care about. And so we'll be zeroing in on that a little bit more. We've got statements like this one for all of the sustainability indicators in the handout. And again, not seawater intrusion. Questions?
Anyone? Nothing in the chat box. Any advisory committee members who have a question at this point? I don't see one, John.
All righty. Field program update. So this is the location of those 2 monitoring wells that Frank mentioned earlier. We've got SP29 over here, and then SP128, kind of near Gajito Creek, right in here, and a couple satellite imagery of where each of these are, kind of near the road in both cases. So I thought I'd spend a little time talking about what a multiple completion well looks like, since we have these great photos and charts of them. So this is a drill rig that was used to install these wells. And usually this is the rig part up and down. You can just barely see the well right here. There's a piece of plastic pipe sticking out. And so what they did is they drilled a fairly large hole in the ground, and then they lowered in 3 pieces of PVC pipe. And you probably can't see it, but this pipe here has little slots in it, and that's how water gets into this one. These 2 are just solid casing because the parts with the slots in it are somewhere else. These 3 pipes are kind of stuck together here with some spacers to keep it in the center of the hole in the ground. And then they'll lower this down into the ground. And what that means is we'll have 3 different pieces of pipe. Here's a shallow one, that goes maybe 150 feet. Here's a medium one that goes almost 200. And then here's a deep one that went just up to 300. And so these are all in that same hole, but each pipe is separate and is considered its own well. And I'll show you why they can be separate, even though they're in the same hole on the next slide. And then we collect all the cuttings. So every 5 feet, a geologist or an engineer will go over the drill rig and take a wire mesh, and put it into the flow of discharge material that comes out of the well. They use this rotary bit, and it grinds down the dirt and the rocks, and that stuff gets lifted out either with water, mud, or air. And then you can sample that. You sample it every 5 feet, and you fill out this little tray, and you get a sense of what the subsurface looks like. So this one here is 100 feet from 5 to 100. It's all pretty brown, pretty fine grained stuff. We got a little bit of sandy looking things here. And this is a little segment of from 150 to 200. I'm not sure if it's from the same well or a different one. You can see this is black. It's a different type of rock. It's very granular, a lot of sand. And so we note that stuff so that we can construct the well appropriately. You don't want to put the screens in your well across from clay. You want them to be near sand and gravel. And so what you do is you build your well, and then you put gravel in around the screen, and then clay above that up to the next completion where you put sand again or gravel again, and then clay. And so the clay or the bentonite in these holes separates each of these completions from each other. And so this well monitors conditions here, and that this one monitors here, and this one monitors up here. And if the well's built correctly, there's no leakage in between. And so each completion in this well monitors a separate spot. And you can see there's our 3 pieces sticking out in the middle of the outer case. This is how big the hole that was originally drilled was. And then we've got our 3 wells sticking out there. And this is what it looks like at the surface. You got a pipe sticking up, concrete pad, and 4 bollards. And that's monitoring wells 101. These are a really nice ad. They give us some geology reference from the materials. We'll be able to look for vertical gradients between the different completions of the well and things of that nature. So moving forward, they're better than wells you monitor that are in use, like someone's house well or an irrigation well, because since these aren't ever pumping, and they're too small to pump, you can't pump any reasonable amount of water out of these. Sometimes you can't even lift water out so far down. These are constant, whereas if a well pumps, turns on, turns off, the levels go up and down. And it takes a while for them to settle. And if you measure just after they pumped, you get a value that's too low sometimes. So dedicated monitoring wells are great. We've got 2 of these. This one had 3. The other spot had 2 inside, not 3. It's a little shallower. Isotope sampling. So isotope sampling is underway by the field consultant, and they've sampled groundwater in the basin already, I understand, and they went to these stream gauges to get samples of the surface water flowing in towards the basin. And my understanding is that they'll have a report with the results of the study in about a month. Does that sound right, Sandra?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Questions, comments on the field program?
Anybody from the advisory committee? John, you said those wells are working right now, the 3 level wells, right?
Well, they're drilled right now, and
They're drilled.
They're drilled, and I'm not sure if there's electric transducers in them or not. But you could measure depth to water in them right now, no problem.
Okay.
John, this is Frank Conine. You went over the slide showing the stream gauge monitorings, and at that moment I had my attention deflected for just a moment. Earlier this morning, the technical review committee, you did show that slide, but it was incomplete. It only had information for one of the sites. Do you intend to get back to us with information from all 3 of those stream gauges and also the watershed flowing into those stream gauges?
So we have a watershed map of the entire tributary that includes the San Pasqual Valley that we made in response to comments on our first watershed map, which just wasn't that accurate, it turns out. And the figure we showed this morning with the bar charts, that was all an error. We have all that data. We've analyzed that data. I completely should have caught that those bar charts were all the same. Somehow that squeaked through everybody looking at it prior to today. So we'll be revising that with the right information for sure. The surface water gauges are really mostly useful for just understanding the amounts of water moving through the basin. They're helpful for the water budget work that will be undertaken with the numeric model. And they also help us understand, and when we look at it matching with some surface water quality, if some of the water coming in has high TDS, for example, well, that influences our ability to set thresholds for TDS. And we'll be revisiting that in detail when we get to it, of course.
But will you also be including the acreage or square miles feeding each of those stream gauges or tributaries?
Wasn't planning to. It's not something we need to do by regulation, and it doesn't influence the groundwater model or the integrated water model.
I would disagree with that. I would disagree with that. I disagree with it on the premise that this particular March, we had an extremely wet March. This year, this rain season has been a way above average rain season. And as Valley residents, we see certain streams in the Valley running and other streams in the Valley are not running. And I can only assume, we know, in watching these streams come into the Valley, as they initially enter into the Valley, they disperse into the alluvium. And eventually when the alluvium fills to capacity, to holding capacity, or the volume of water coming in is much stronger, then these seasonal streams continue to progress downstream through the valley, dropping down into the alluvium at farther points along. And as Valley residents and to sit and watch, it's just interesting to see when certain seasonal stream beds start running and when they finish running. And to a certain extent, in layman's terms, I would associate that to the holding capacity of the groundwater basin in that area.
Okay, so I agree the surface water flow amounts are important, but not the out of basin upstream catchment.
Well, it would be, because if I would show you particularly, stream bed A was running and B was not, but then we find out that A comes from 25,000 square miles and B only comes from 10 square miles, I don't have a point. But if the square mile is different, I have a very valid point.
I'm following, Frank. When it rains, a certain amount of water seeps into the ground before it starts to flow away downhill. So the good news is that at least some of this area is inside the model domain, but two of them aren't. Well, we'll take a better look at it, and I'll talk to you a little more when we follow up with you about that well location we identified earlier today.
Fair enough.
Sandra, do you have a comment?
Well, I was just going to say the city has some watershed information that we could add to it.
Okay, great. Any other advisory committee members want to comment on this particular part of the agenda or the presentation rather? Are there any advisory committees members who are on the phone who want to comment or ask a question at this point in the presentation? Okay, John, again, I'm not seeing anybody.
All right, moving on to public comment.
This is those of you who are members of the public and not advisory committee members to ask a question or make a comment. Anybody have anything to go to the order?
Yep.
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, Alicia?
Yeah, this is Alicia Pell from the city of Escondido, and apologize, I wasn't at the last meeting where the undesirable results were kind of worked through. But the document that was sent out the table has some TBD categories for interim milestones and project management actions. And so are these something that'll be worked out through future meetings? Or is this kind of the only time that it's going to be discussed with the group?
So the only thing we're trying to settle in on right now are those undesirable result statements. The sustainable management criteria, which includes those interim milestones, is something we're going to start talking about next meeting. Okay. And then the projects and management actions is something we start talking about the meeting after that. So like October. So these things definitely you'll see more, hear more about those. We're just working on the primer up to them. And to be honest, I didn't expect to fill as many parts of that table out as we did. I'm always surprised when we do it. But there's usually a lot more TBDs on there because those are things we have to address later.
Okay. I guess, you know, there's from the notes from the last workshop, it seemed that you know, many people expressed a concern about water quality, and I think that it's a challenge to clearly communicate about water quality, meaning drinking water quality and groundwater quality and surface water quality. So I would just encourage that maybe all of those are important, but you know, if there's a certain narrowness of the scope of this program or the plan, you know, that should be clarified, because like under water quality, I think in the description it does kind of mention all of those uses: domestic, agricultural, municipal, and environmental. But it might be nice to add something in there to say not just groundwater quality, unless that is all that's being discussed here.
That is, so it's the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Surface water quality is already managed by the Regional Water Quality Control Board, as is a lot of groundwater quality. And one of the things we have to consider under SGMA and our groundwater sustainability plan is are we doing something that's required by law? We have to manage the 6 sustainability indicators: levels, storage, groundwater quality, seawater intrusion, surface water groundwater interaction, and subsidence. And all of those are as they relate to groundwater use. And so it really is focused on groundwater only. And then the other factor that we want to consider is, can the GSA actually manage this facet or thing? So if we were, say, worried about, chrome-6, which is a toxic mineral that is in some bedrock and some contaminated sites, is that something the GSA could regulate? And the answer there is no, because the GSA cannot force people to clean up toxic sites, and the GSA cannot change bedrock. And so we want to focus the things that we're worried on, that we worry about in the plan, to things the GSA can actively manage. And TDS falls under that category, which is why we talk about total dissolved solids, and that if GSA could address that by either importing cleaner water or, working with somebody to clean up water. But if our surface water coming in is salty, as it is at some of these gauges, that's going to contribute to salt water in the subsurface. And we don't want to set thresholds that we can't possibly meet without millions or billions of dollars of expenditures, because that's not real. And the costs of implementation are going to be on the people in the basin. And so we want to make sure that we're managing the things that affect people in the basin at a scale that allows people to still operate in the basin, if that makes sense.
It does. Thanks for the explanation.
Other public comments. Frank, let me see if there's any other public comments. Okay, go ahead, Frank. Sorry.
Refresh my memory. We are an advisory committee, but who do we advise? Who are we advising? City? Are we advising city and county? Are we advising technical review committee? Are we advising John Ayers and his company? Who exactly are we advising?
Well, I do love being advised, but you are advising me, but that's only because I work for the GSA. So, and somebody who might know more, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the advisory committee and the technical peer review group give advice or recommendations to the core team of the GSA, and that's the city and the county together. The consultant team works under the city directly because the city has contract authority, but we work for the core team, for the GSA, and that's always been our focus. And so as you advise the core team, you are also advising the consultant team.
Okay, then as a follow-up to that, as a member of the advisory committee, I'd like to remind other members that a very large California landowner has a toe in our groundwater basin. They've refused to share their well construction data for their deep bedrock wells, which in itself elicits some suspicion. The majority of the valley is city leaseholds that have water meters, water quality testing, and we've shared all the available construction data that we have of those wells. Since John mentioned earlier that the model would need a lot of estimation and our future depends upon this estimation, I would ask the advising committee to support me in advising the core team, which is the city of San Diego and the county of San Diego, that they should collect and use the data available from the 2 city monitoring wells and the 3 USGS wells so that it can be incorporated into the groundwater models utilizing the interaction between the alluvium, the residuum, and the bedrock. In my opinion, to say that the bedrock is not part of the groundwater basin is kicking the can down the road, and it's incomprehensible when we have 5 data collection points that we could be tapping into. It almost seems as if somebody's trying to protect that single large landowner. And I don't know if any of the other advisory committee members would support me in this endeavor.
Maybe I can speak to that a little bit, Frank. This is Matt Whitman. I agree with what you're saying. I agree that transparency is best for all of us. I'm disappointed in our large private landowner that they have been less than transparent in their disclosures to the city, and would hope that that lack of transparency would not benefit them in any way. Thank you.
Are there any other public comments at this point? Or any other comments from the advisory committee or any of the core teams? Hearing none, John, you want to go to the next slide?
Next steps and closing remarks. If you've got any written comments on today's materials, please send them to Sandra by May 28th. We're keeping a response to comments list going, and we do take all comments seriously, even if we don't respond or jump up and down when we get them. We do take them quite seriously, and they're important. And the next meeting is Thursday, July 9th, 2 to 4 p.m. And depending on whether we can do that in person or not, it'll either be in person at probably the same place as last time, or we might have to do go-to-meeting again.
We'd be letting you know that in plenty of time, everyone. Sandra will be keeping you updated on the status of that meeting.
So this is Sandra. Oh,
sorry. I was going to call on you.
And we need each other's thoughts. This is Sandra Carlson one more time. I wanted a couple of things. I want to thank, first of all, Frank and Matt for allowing us to come onto their sites and drill our nested monitoring wells. There was a lot of effort on their part to let us in. That we're drilling on their site for 2 weeks each. So it was a lot of inconvenience on their part, and we appreciate how generous they were. So thank you for that again. And then also thank you to the consultant team. I thought you did a great job on a virtual meeting basis, which has been challenging at best. So thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
I'm still a little lost. This is Frank Conine. I had asked if there was advisory committee support, and I feel like my comment was acknowledged, but I don't know if there is advisory committee support or there is not advisory committee support for my suggestion.
Okay.
Frank,
at this point, I'm not sure how to get that. If we were all in a room, we might call for a straw poll or something. But John or Sandra, do you want to talk about this? Is this something for an agenda item for a future meeting or what?
Okay. Does anybody else want to say anything?
This is Carol Burkhardt.
Yes, go.
This is Carol Burkhardt. Hi. Hi, Frank. I just want to share that this is the first I've heard of it. I don't know if this happened in a technical review meeting that I didn't attend because I don't attend the technical review. So I was not aware that our large landowner has been uncooperative. So, you know, of course, I'm in agreement with both Frank and Matt, as you know, small private landowner here, that it behooves all of us, of course, to try to be as transparent as possible to build the best plan. So I just want to put my support behind Frank and thank him for bringing that to our attention. And anyway, that's all I want to say.
Okay, thank you,
this is
Carol.
Trish
And
Bose.
Eric Larson wants to comment. He sent something into the chat box.
Yeah, Frank, you know, I can't say that I don't support, but I'm coming from a point of lack of information on this. Everything you have said is new information to me in real time, and just no ability to take a stand and know what's going on without having more background on what's taking place. You folks on the ground there in the valley, sure, you know, but and maybe because you went to the technical committee, but here on this call, just don't have the information.
I will third that. This is Trish Bose with the Conservancy. I think everyone should be transparent. Now is the time. And so I echo Carol and Eric and Frank and Matt's comments. Absolutely.
Hey, this is Jim Bennett. Just wanted to chime in. John, maybe you can elaborate on what Rancho Guido has provided, because I believe they provided quite a bit of data to the GSA, including aquifer testing that they've done on site, water level data, groundwater production data, maybe even, I'm not sure, but they've provided quite a bit of information. I think there were a few wells in the bedrock which are in DWR records that are available to the GSA. So there's really nothing that we're missing that I'm aware of. John, can you elaborate on that?
Well, so they gave us construction information for about 5 wells that are at the south end of Gahito Creek there, and 2 different aquifer tests conducted in those 5 wells. I think 3 of those are monitoring wells, 2 of them are production. They've also, Peter Quinlan today offered up a monitoring well that's further up into the canyon there. It's dry, but we're going to use that as well. On the whole, they've been fairly cooperative. We've gotten fair amounts of data from them. Well construction, the levels data goes back about 3 years, and the aquifer testing.
We have no deep well information.
John, I believe you do have the DWR wells that were the deep wells on Rancho Cojito are publicly available on the DWR website.
Right.
If I may interject, reading from the minutes of the TPR meeting on January 9th, it specifically says Rancho Guajito's TPR member will check with council on the release of those reports.
What I'm saying though is that the wells are available. We checked that after the January meeting, and that information is with our consultants. So we have all the information, I believe, including the deep wells, because those are publicly available on the DWR website.
And we do have logs from other wells that are in that area that were used in the development of cross sections. So some well completion reports were also available outside of what they gave us. They did give us a lot of data for that southern end, though.
And Sandra, I thought I just heard you saying that you still did not have the deep water wells. Where is the misunderstanding?
I wasn't aware of any from Rancho Cojito. I wasn't aware that we had any well logs in the bedrock from Rancho Cojito. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I have not seen those. So.
Okay. Well, John, I think, and Patty, I think there's definitely a flavor of this conversation will be reflected in the minutes, and hopefully at a future time when we have more information, the advisory committee could give better advice.
Here's a suggestion.
John,
sorry.
Go ahead.
Jim, what do you think if the core team discusses this and we bring it up? We bring it back at the next AC meeting.
Yeah, I think that's a great
That
idea.
was exactly what I was going to suggest. So thank you.
There you go. Frank, does that sound all right?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I just don't want it to fall on deaf ears. That's all. I am not the end all know all of this topic. It's just something as somebody that has lived in this valley my entire life. It's something I'm passionate about, and I have witnessed the actions and the movement and the life and blood of this valley and the water that flows under this valley, and so I'm passionate about it, and I just don't want the topic to die.
Frank, this is Ricky. This is
Yes.
Ricky. I could ask you, what do you think is missing?
I felt that at the last technical review committee meeting, there was a consensus that we were going to include the residuum and the bedrock in the groundwater study, and that the majority of the technical consultants felt that that was the proper thing to do in this valley. And then between the last technical review committee and this technical review committee, that feeling changed, and they came back with a very sterile, we'll follow Bulletin 118, but we have so many data points that we can tap into, and I'm concerned of why people are ignoring all of those available data points, whether they are data points that are publicly available or data points that have been specifically withheld.
Thank you.
John and Rosalind, I assume, and Sandra and Leanne and Nikki and Jim, it sounds like this will be an agenda item for the next AC meeting. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, correct.
All right. Thank you. Frank, I think that's the best we can do today. And Matt, I think that's the best we can do today. And everybody on the AC will get some more information about this and have a more robust discussion about it.
And the AC is also, just one last thing, the AC committee members are also welcome to email their, if they have comments, to email their comments.
Right, and I see your email address prominently featured right here in front of me, carlsons@sandiego.gov. You can run, but you can't hide.
This is Frank Conine. When we do email those comments, where, because I believe, submitted comments twice and I did not receive any, I don't believe I received any acknowledgement of receipt of comments. So how would I know that those comments were taken and incorporated?
Frank, we have discussed this at the core team level. We have logged each of every comment, and we have responded not to the person back to you yet. Those comments will go into the plan. So we have not decided yet how we will individually respond to those comments. It's still to be determined, but we have logged. Yeah, we're keeping a log. We just haven't decided how we'll respond.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Comments or questions from anyone else? This would be the time if you have anything else. Other than that, we're close to our 3:30 point. Sandra, do you have anything else you wanted to say before we adjourn?
No, great job.
John, anything else from you before we adjourn?
That's it for me. Thanks everybody for paying attention.
Or...
Looking forward to comments. Thanks a bunch.
Okay, everybody, thank you so much for participating today. It was really helpful and a good discussion, and we'll look forward to hopefully actually seeing everybody in person in July or participating in this way again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Care.
Bye.
Everybody.